And good afternoon. About 1,000 hectares of land is urbanized every single day in Europe. That's an estimate. About the size of Berlin. Every day it's urbanized from other use to urban. And that land will probably never revert back. The question is, how is it doing it? What's driving this? Is this sustainable? Where is this happening? It's not happening all over in Europe, in every region the same. Territory matters. So we're going to look into this matter, and I'm going to walk you through our conceptual framework to show you a bit how we approach this issue. The outcome. A lot of that we already know. We have data. We're very blessed right now with very good data, with Korean 2018 data, and we can go back to 2000 and compare how land use has changed in Europe. So there's a quantitative side that we can actually measure, and from one to the other. We can also look at hotspots of which regions are changing the land the most, and in which ways, which ones are urbanizing the most, and in which ways. But there's also a qualitative side. Where is this happening? Is this happening along roadways? Is this happening in river basins? Is this happening along coasts? What's the urban form that we're all creating with this 1,000 hectares per day land use change? So this is part of our project, is the outcomes. And some of this is quite well known. It's at a macro level. There's also a side, which is also relatively well known in the literature, and that's the drivers of this. It's also at a macro level. So, of course, more people require more houses, or perhaps more households require more houses. More economic development means that there's going to be more demand for business parks and the like. So things like that we can already know. There are many studies about this that we can rely on and look into the drivers on the demand side. There's also a literature about supply side. Land is very profitable to develop when it goes from one land use, a rural land use, to urban land use, increases quite a lot in value. This is also a source of economic development and also a source of income of municipalities. So there's also a drive, and you also have the supply of land that's sometimes quite constricted. It can be constricted by geographic constrictions, or it can be constricted by policy. And that's another thing, that policies, that's why we have institutional territorial context, that's very, very important. They come and they affect both the demand side and the supply side. So we're going to be looking at various interventions and how they interact to create, let's say, the drivers. So now we have on one side the drivers of urbanization, on the other side the outcome, both at the macro level. But what really happens on the ground? That remains a black box. And so that's another thing that we're going to do in the super project. And that's the middle part. We want to lift the lid on this black box and peer inside and see how is land actually getting converted. Who's doing this? In most countries, you just can't develop. You need planning permission. Someone has to give planning permission. There is an interaction between various actors, various stakeholders. How does this occur? To do this, we're going to do 10 case studies and really zoom in on the practices on the ground, and also look at how interventions, public sector interventions to steer this development actually work. Are they successful or not? Can we learn from them? Can we transfer them from one situation to the other? So that's our conceptual framework that we have. And assessing all this, is this sustainable? This whole scheme of the way we convert land in Europe. And we're also looking at sustainability in terms of temporal. Are we going to put a mortgage on future generations by what we're doing now? But also in terms of the balance between people, planet, and profit. So we're going to look at this and see if this whole machine, this mechanism is sustainable or not. And this is the title of our project: Sustainability, Urbanization Practices and Outcomes in European Regions. So, getting to the outcomes, we just delivered our inception report, so we have lots and lots of promises about what we're going to do, and now is the time that we actually have to do it. So, looking forward to the end, what are we actually going to produce? Well, this is what we promised, and hopefully it's going to be innovative. First, we're going to give really up-to-date evidence on land use developments, changes, the hotspots, what's urbanizing, what is converting where. That's what we're going to do, and luckily we have some very, very good data. This is probably the best time ever to carry out this project. That's more quantitative. We're also going to look at the interventions. What do policymakers do? What do we do to try to steer that urbanization in more sustainable ways? And does that work? And we're collecting that data now. Some of you have already answered a survey on this, and you probably know about this. If not, you might get the survey later. And we're going to then compile this and see what works and what doesn't work. Practices on the ground, 10 case studies, really going deep about how the land is converted and getting those lessons and turning them into recommendations for policymakers. Part of it is we're also going to do some land use modeling. We have now access to a model where we can predict land use change up to 2050 according to different parameters. So we're going to do a business as usual versus an urban containment, and then at a very fine detail, you can see whether or not this urbanization pattern is desirable, whether it's sustainable. So we're also going to need your help, the stakeholders, to see if your region is developing in the way you want and get your feedback on this. And that's another thing that we want to do. We have 2 ECPs in our project team. We want to reach out to stakeholders and ask them, what do you think about this? We've done the math, we show you how land use is changing, but the normative aspect of this, how desirable is it, how sustainable is it, we want some input from policymakers as well. So thank you very much.